Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here this morning. I'm super excited to have this distinguished panel here to talk about thriving and what that means in post-military life. Last night we held our 5th annual gala in this room right here, and that was our theme. It was about how our service members are able to thrive post-military. And I wanted to share some stories last night, but we had a tremendously long program. I feel inclined to say that I've experienced that through the Travis Manion Foundation with individuals who are working with me right now. I want to share a quick story. I'm gonna embarrass him a little bit, but sitting in the audience today is my Director of Strategic Partnerships, Hugo Lense. Hugo. And so I just want to share Hugo's story very quickly. A couple of years ago, I had just given birth to my 3rd child and decided that I no longer was a runner and I wanted to now ride a bike. And I thought that would be easier somehow, so I was going to now ride bikes. And of course, as a woman, the first thing I had to do was go buy all the equipment and go buy a really pretty, expensive bike and all the bike gear. And I went into our local bike shop in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and I showed up and I picked out a really neat bike that I had no idea how to use. And this gentleman started helping me with my bike, and he's, tightening the bolts and talking to me, and he said, "So what do you do for a living?" And I said, "I work in nonprofit." And he said, "Oh, what nonprofit?" And I said, it's called the Travis Manion Foundation." And he said, "Travis Manion Foundation, I'm a huge fan." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Oh, how do you know about us?" And he said, "Well, I'm prior military. I'm a West Point grad, retired lieutenant colonel in the Army." And I had a bit of word vomit. And I said, "Why are you working in a bike shop?" And Hugo turned to me and he said, "Well, I had a little bit of trouble transitioning and I decided I'm going to do something I feel passionate about. I love riding bikes, so I figured I'll take a job in a bike shop." And Hugo walked me out, paid for my bike, and he walked me out, and I gave him my card and I said, "Let's talk." And it was just a few months later, Hugo started working for the Travis Manion Foundation. And the idea of, I didn't know Hugo too well when he was working in that bike shop, but watching him now, watching him thrive in his career, seeing how passionate he is to wake up each and every day and make a difference, I think it's very telling because number one, again, when we're talking about transition, a lot of times we take the idea that those that are having trouble transitioning are enlisted service members, with no higher education, and those are the ones that we really need to help. But we need to also understand and identify that all service members have some sort of challenges when they're transitioning. So our goal at the Travis Manion Foundation is to make sure that we are giving them a passion again. We are giving them a sense of purpose. And, we can't hire every transitioning veteran at the Travis Manion Foundation, but what we can do is with individuals like Hugo, we can identify these veterans and we can make sure that they have a sense of purpose. And we're giving them that idea of waking up each and every morning and being a part and feeling a part of something bigger than themselves. According to a recent study, 55% of veterans feel disconnected from their local communities as a result of their service. This is unacceptable, as we all know. As a country, we can and we must do better. But to fix this problem, we have to understand it. What does it mean to feel disconnected? One of our major focuses is empowering veterans, as I mentioned, and survivors to thrive. And we define this as having 3 components. And that's engagement, using strengths and passions to make an impact, positive relationships, camaraderie and that network of support, and meaning, continuing to serve a higher purpose. When you have all 3, we believe that you do thrive. But equally important, you reconnect with yourself, who you were before the military, with your family, your friends, and your community. And today, we will be able to better understand how to take concrete steps to achieve thriving and why it is critical that as a nation we do this. So I want to start now by just introducing our panel and giving them a couple minutes to share a little bit about themselves and the work that they're doing. And I am going to start with Maura Sullivan. Maura served in the Marine Corps, former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, among many other things. We weren't quite sure what to put after that, so we went with that. But Maura, tell us a little bit about yourself and your transition from the military.
Sure. Well, good morning, and first of all, thanks to everybody for being here. And it was an incredible night last night, and really an honor to be a part of it. I'd be remiss, I think, if I did not just acknowledge Ryan and your team and all of the work that you did putting together the gala last night, and having the Commandant of the Marine Corps here and Admiral Mullen. It was really a treat. I never got to know Travis personally, but he was a few years behind me in the Marine Corps. But many of the people that I served with did know him personally, and recently had the opportunity to go and take the Secretary of the Navy and the Undersecretary of the Navy down to the Marine Corps Basic School. And we were taking a tour, and I noticed that there was a very important part of the Marine Corps Basic School that had not been a part of the tour, and that was Manion Hall. And so I took the onus to divert the tour over and explain to our leadership who Travis Manion was, who Fred Pokorny was. The Secretary's aide was a classmate of Travis's at the Naval Academy, and one of the reasons I feel so lucky and privileged to be here today, and I'm so happy to be here today, is that Travis Manion, Fred Pokorny, Shane Childers, Megan McClung, who you heard the Commandant talk about last night, those are our generation of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. They represent the service and sacrifice that so many of us we're privileged to serve with them. So it's really, really great to be here, Ryan, and I appreciate being here. I served in the Marines from 01 to 06, and then transitioned out to go to graduate school. I got an MBA and a Master's in Public Administration. I was fortunate to be at a place where there was a very, very strong military community at my graduate school in Boston. And I played a role in that community and ended up running our student veteran organization my third year there. But when I transitioned out of that, actually had a very difficult time transitioning. I was leaving that military community, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. But what Ryan just said about, sort of this misconception that it's just enlisted service members who have trouble transitioning, I couldn't agree with you more, Ryan. It couldn't be further from the truth. And that's because, as Ryan mentioned, the sense of community, the sense of purpose, the sense of, the person next to you having your back, we get so accustomed to that in the military, you almost take it for granted. And then we don't necessarily feel that in the civilian sector or even in the private sector, which again, I'm happy to talk about too. I've been fortunate to get to serve in the Obama administration, advocating for veterans at both the VA and the Pentagon, which has been the second greatest honor of my life after serving in Iraq, leading Marines. And I'm actually in the midst of a transition right now. As the Obama administration winds down and those of us continue on with our next chapter of service. So thank you again for having me here, and it's great to be here.
Thanks so much, Maura. Next, I want to introduce Brigadier General Carol Eggert, VP of Military and Veterans Affairs at Comcast.
Well, good morning, and I should add that's Brigadier General retired.
Yeah.
I too am so pleased to be here, and last night was actually an amazing event. And I'll be honest, when I first joined Comcast, Travis Manion, I think it was the first thing somebody came to me and said, okay, we've got to support. I said, what is it? I'm not a Marine, sorry, but I sure know now, and I sure support what you're doing, and we'll continue this great partnership. If you think it's tough to transition as an enlisted person, as a senior officer, try being a general and transition. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to talk to you. Luckily, I had my retirement and I was doing just fine, but I have found another way to serve this wonderful community, and that's as the lead for Comcast's NBC Universal's initiatives to support the military community. And that's everything from recruiting to hiring, to onboarding, to developing. And that's just one arm. Also, what do we do with our philanthropic giving? Which organization should we support? Obviously, Travis Manion is one that fits right in with our pillars of giving. How do we serve our military customers? Just think about it. When you move, every couple of years, what do you do with your services, your cable services? What kind of programs and support do we need to give our military customers? And if you don't have a military lens on everything you do, you're not going to do very well at that. So I'm so thrilled to have a team that understands the military and can help Comcast NBC figure out how best to support the military community. I have 2 members of our team here. Luckily, imagine this. Comcast has stood up this team a year ago. I was the first one. I had to come up with a strategy, a staffing plan, a budget. 8 people are on this team. 8 people to serve the military community. That's incredible. I'd like to point out 2 of them. Chris Hoyler just came to us from the Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Air Force, Public Affairs Officer. And with him is Sergeant First Class retired Ed Carr. Ed was a combat medic and also what he'll say, a recruiter of medical professionals, and he wasn't a recruiter. He was out looking for patriots willing to continue to serve their country. And they're doing such a super job helping us do what Comcast has pledged to do. And I always tell everyone, you know, they throw out the general thing, but I'm most proud of my 12 years of enlisted time. I did not go to OCS until after 12 years of serving. So I think I've seen just about every element of service, and I appreciate everyone who has raised their hand. And I think all of us, I'm going to ask everybody to call to action here. So many folks I meet, and it makes me very sad, will say, I'm just a peacetime veteran. I'm just. If you raised your hand, you are everything everybody else is. You were willing to do what anyone has done. So let's discourage any individual from saying, I only served in peacetime. We all served, and they deserve our recognition and respect. So thank you so much, Ryan, for having me here, and thank you for what you're doing for our military community. I'm just so honored to continue to support it.
Thanks so much. Next, we have Dr. Jim Martin, retired colonel in the U.S. Army, a professor of social work at Bryn Mawr College, and Dr. Martin has been instrumental in helping us with our mentoring curriculum for families of the fallen. Dr. Martin.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm thrilled to be here. This has just, been a lovely 2 days. By background, I'm a clinical social worker, retired in 1994 from the Army, having spent a significant amount of time at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, studying across not only the Army but all the services issues of combat stress and a variety of other issues impacting military members and their families. And I've continued to do that during my academic career. Literally the last 20 years working with both the Air Force and the Marine Corps in their family service programs, within the Air Force promoting a concept called community capacity building, and that's really how the Air Force family programs are all structured. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to help develop the Army's Survivor Outreach Service Program. Actually wrote the program guidance for that initiative, and along the way met many Gold Star family members. And that's really been my connection to Travis Manion and their work with survivors. I come at this, and the panel today, I just want to be very clear, I come at this from the perspective of being a social worker, and that lens often puts me in situations where I'm looking at those among us, our veterans and our families, who are not doing all that well, who are often operating in the shadows, who come at this experience with a lot of pain, suffering, sometimes helplessness. And recalling the remark that Ryan made about the number of veterans who talk about not being connected, I will assure you that the root of that typically doesn't come from their military experiences, but is part of the aspect of our entire nation where literally 50% of our children experience during their childhood what we call adverse childhood experiences. And we know that the more of those experiences that occur, the more likely that those individuals are going to have difficulty in adulthood. And our military members, our veterans, and our families are not excluded from that population. Many of them bring with them not only the residue of their military experiences, good and bad, but bring them the residue of childhood and adolescence that in our society has sometimes been less than satisfactory in terms of their development. So we'll talk some more about that this morning.
Thanks so much, Dr. Martin. Next, we have Matthew McCarthy. Matthew served in the U.S. Army. He is now a principal of Finance Division for Vanguard.
Thanks for having me this morning, Ryan. It's really an honor to be here with this panel to talk to you about veterans thriving. I transitioned from the military after my company command tour in the summer of 2001, so I left just before 9/11. And I, like Maura, transitioned through a graduate program at a school that had a significant population of Armed Forces alumni, that we called them at the time, and did find that sense of community. There were members of that community who'd helped me in the process of getting into that institution before I'd left the service, and my greatest connections in my time there on campus were through the folks that I got to know who shared that common background. And then when I transitioned into the workforce after business school in a consulting firm, there wasn't that same sense, and one of the things that I did with folks who had similar backgrounds was trying to create that sense of community. And now at Vanguard for the last 9 years, I recognize that same need. And so what we've started is what we call Vets Connect. And I'll talk to you more about what we're doing there, but it really is about having those folks who've served have the opportunity to really feel that same sense of connection that you get from your time in the service, that small unit camaraderie. And then how do we take the benefits of the folks who feel that and find ways to give back to the broader organization to help us as we really stitch the entire community together to meet our mission as an organization. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Lakin Booker. Lakin comes with a unique perspective of presently transitioning out of the Marine Corps. She's a participant in the Triumph and Invictus Games, and with the Triumph Games, which just aired a few weeks ago on CBS, she was the winner of the Character Award, which was given out by the Travis Manion Foundation and Johnson & Johnson. And we'll talk to you a little bit about the work that she did and really the idea of, as a transitioning veteran, finding that sense of purpose through inspiring the next generation. Lakin?
Thank you, Ryan. First of all, how am I going to top these people? Have you heard, listen to their resumes. They're amazing. But I am recently transitioned out of the Marine Corps. I did 9 years. Unfortunately, the last tour that I did in Afghanistan, they said no more. I was hit by an IED and I have shrapnel on my back, and they said, you're no longer useful to us, so we're going to have to go ahead and let you medically get out. So after I got out, I had no sense of purpose. I literally, you can ask my wife, Melissa, I sat at the house. I didn't do anything. I couldn't find a job. Couldn't do anything. So luckily found a job as a busser at a restaurant, and a couple months later now I'm the general manager of that restaurant. So, luckily I have that. But, absolutely, you can listen to everyone. And when you transition out of the Marine Corps, when you transition out of anything, you don't have a sense of purpose anymore. You don't have that camaraderie. You don't have those friends, that family anymore. And being part of the military, you move so much that you're used to saying goodbye and never seeing those people again. So when you finally get out, there's no time to transition, especially if you get out medically. They'll give you your paper and they'll say 3 days later you have your EAS date. It's that fast. It's not like normal EASers. So, I'm here to talk to you guys and see what's going on, but I was one of those lucky few that's still here, unfortunately, like other people.
Thanks so much, Lakin. And finally, we have Zach Iskell. Zach served in the United States Marine Corps and is the executive director of an amazing organization, the Headstrong Project, which works with veterans suffering from PTSD. Zach?
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. Ryan, this has been an incredible 24 hours. Before I just talk about what I do, but just a story that comes to mind. When I was 14 years old, I had a older brother figure named John Schlesinger, who was killed in a car accident driving home. He was riding shotgun from a Fish concert. And John was an older brother. He taught me I wanted to be a hockey goalie because he was a hockey goalie. He taught me how to play hockey after school. He kept me from getting beat up by bullies because I was a wise ass and I was smaller than everybody else. And at John's funeral, the rabbi pulled all of the young kids aside, and John was about 6 years older than me, and he said, you all now have a responsibility to live your life for John. And when I was in Iraq, whenever we would lose a Marine, I would pull my Marines in and I would tell them that story. And, being here the last 24 hours, 12 hours with Travis Manion, that's in the bones of this organization. And you guys are doing a remarkable job honoring his memory and giving so many others a sense of purpose and a way of honoring their John Schlesingers. My full-time job, I work in digital media. About 4 years ago, I was going to pitch two investors, a guy named Al Rabel and a guy named Dave Petrucco, who are very, very successful finance guys in New York City, on investing in my business. The night before, 2 days before, I'd had drinks with my battalion commander from Fallujah, a guy named Colonel Willie Buell, who was stationed in the city at the time. And my battalion, we fought in the Second Battle of Fallujah. We lost 33 Marines. Half the battalion, about 500 men, were wounded. And we'd had a number of suicides in the battalion at that time. And so over drinks, Colonel Buell said to me, Zach, I'm worried that at some point in time we're going to have lost more Marines to suicide than we had to enemy action. And we were one of the hardest hit battalions of the Iraq War. And we'd also had a really, not that there's ever a good suicide, but we'd had a really tragic suicide about 2 weeks earlier. And so I told that story to Al Rabel and Dave Petrucco. And Al Rabel, who's probably on his way to being a billionaire, said to me, I don't understand this. If I need to see the top psychiatrist in New York City tomorrow morning, doesn't matter if they accept insurance, doesn't matter if they don't have availability, doesn't matter what their rates are, they'll fit me in. And at the time, there was a lot of stories about long wait times at the VA, and he said, why can't we do that for our veterans? And I tried to pivot the conversation back to investing in my business. That was not happening. He became very interested in how do we take on this problem. And that became the foundation of Headstrong. And so we started an organization in partnership with Cornell Medical Center to provide the type of care that an Al Rabel could get to any veteran coming home to treat post-traumatic stress, substance abuse, you name it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So we're going to just dive right into questions here, and I'm going to start with Dr. Martin. Dr. Martin, you've done extensive research on the topic of building resilience in veterans, service members, and families of the fallen. How are these individuals' experience with loss and separation similar to one another? What must they do in order to have healthy and productive reintegration with their families and communities?
Let me begin by, highlighting 4 key points that I'd like to sort of weave that answer around. One is the notion of how important it is that we don't pathologize our veterans. You see a lot of that, in the press around things like post-traumatic stress disorder and other kinds of issues. At the same time, I think it's important that we don't idealize veterans in that same sense. And what I mean by that is recognize that veterans bring to that moment, that experience, a lot of things with them. I use as a metaphor the notion of a rucksack. That soldier, being a soldier myself, who's come out of combat and is carrying that very heavy rucksack. Well, that rucksack comes back with them virtually as they come back into society, and they bring with them both the good and the bad that's in that rucksack. And those become some of the challenges, sort of unpacking that in their civilian experience. And there are a lot of things that may have happened to them that they're going to have to deal with. The same is true when we think about our surviving family members. Important point that was made last night by one of the speakers. I can't remember whom. Oh, I'm sorry. It was the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and that was the notion of how we think about our surviving family members. I wrote an article recently trying to define what we mean by military-connected family members and loved ones, and how we expand that sort of circle. But we also need to remember that those families, just like our veterans, have their own challenges that were part of that experience before the loss of their loved one. That was probably most profoundly made real to me an interview I did at Fort Riley, Kansas, a number of years ago, where a young wife who was part of an honoring ceremony for her husband who had been killed in Afghanistan, was having some significant difficulty. And there were ceremonies, and he was being honored, and people were trying to deal with that. And I had the opportunity to have a private conversation with her. And she looked at me and she said, you know, I had prayed that he would die. And I asked her about this, and it turned out she was a battered woman. Her marriage had been full of violence, and as her husband went off to the war, she was just full of hate. He dies, and now she's living with the guilt that she experienced or interpreted from that. So it's important to remember that our surviving family members bring their own experiences, their own history to this moment, and those are not, always positive. Like the veterans, these are challenges. And often these are challenges that we don't find space or opportunity for them to talk about, and to try to gain some perspective on all of that. So that's an important part of I think, that experience. I also, going back to what I had said earlier, want to recognize that all of us bring our humanity to these moments. And again, going back to that earlier figure that I gave of 50% of our children in our society whose own histories have involved some kind of adverse experience, usually in the context of abuse or neglect, or what we might think about as disruptions in relationships. So when we talk about these veterans or we talk about these family members, and again, I began by saying my lens is often on those who are suffering. When we think about these individuals and these families, we have to remember that that's part of what's in their rucksack as well. And how do we help them? When we think about our veterans right now who are dealing with a whole variety of what we call behavioral health issues, in particular post-traumatic stress disorder, I'm reminded that one of the core elements of that experience is the difficulty that veteran, and I would apply this to our surviving family members who are sometimes in the same situation, the difficulty they have establishing and sustaining healthy relationships. So in our programs, we offer, an outreach, and we try to be supportive, and we sometimes wonder why they're not taking advantage of that or why they drop out of treatment. We have to remember that often these are individuals who at some point have been harmed in close relationships. And so the more we extend ourselves, the harder that challenge is for the veteran, the harder it is for the family member. And so the issue for us is, how do we be persistent? How do we be caring? How do we demonstrate the kind of empathy that can sustain that difficult process and not quit on these people? There's a colleague of mine, John Briere, who is a mental health professional at UCLA and works with veterans on the West Coast. And he often talks about that kind of challenge. And the notion here, and this goes back to where Ryan started with the whole notion of thriving within the Travis Manion model. And I would suggest that it begins and it ends with this notion of relationship. And how do we help people, especially those in that percentage who have experienced the kinds of horrific things, whether it's been through their childhood experience or been through their military service, that make it difficult for them to, again, connect and sustain relationships. So our real challenge is, how do we be present? How do we maintain engagement, recognizing that it is going to be difficult, and we have to do this in a slow, persistent, and consistent manner to assist these individuals. So let me stop with that.
No, I appreciate your comments, and a lot of that is, again, you work with us, so a lot of it is what we're talking about at the Travis Manion Foundation, and we're very quick to say the work that we do. We're a matrix organization. We have a lot of different initiatives, but we don't take a siloed approach to the way that we work with veterans and families of the fallen. Our organization embodies both of those two groups of individuals, and the programs that we run are open to both of those groups of individuals, because the transition process that we're talking about, that idea of thriving, that holds true for veterans and families of the fallen very much in a lot of the same ways. I'm going to turn and talk a little bit about employment now and the role that that plays, and my question now is for General Eggert. The most recent study from the Center of New American Security reports that about half of veterans leave their first post-military career within 1 year, and nearly 2/3 within 2 years. You've been a strong proponent of the crucial role that veteran skills and talents play in the workplace. What, then, are we continuing to get wrong as it pertains to retention? Why are we seeing such a large attrition rate?
Thank you, Ryan. I'm going to first share my return to the U.S. from combat in Iraq, because I don't often speak about it, and I think one of our problems is veterans don't speak about their experience. We keep it hidden, and so people get the wrong impression of veterans because we don't share our stories. So my team will tell you I seldom do. I don't even know that they know it. But I was in an attack in Iraq, and it was not a good time in what we thought was the safe green zone. I was out in the outside of the wire all the time, and our vehicle was attacked by a multiple array of rockets. Didn't think much of it, which I think most people, I don't know what takes over, training, whatever. It's not any special courage. Anything I felt was anger that we were attacked. Many of us were injured. But when I returned now, what I did, and I had no clue that's what I was doing, I took a couple months off before reporting to the Army War College as a professor. And my daughter had just graduated from college. I read more books than I've ever read in my life. It was wonderful. And my daughter and I trained for the Philadelphia Marathon. Didn't know that would help me, but I can't tell you the role of wellness and fitness in building resilience. And it helped my family because it was very tough on my family. They were, college kids. They knew what was going on. They saw the news. And they struggled also. But we would go out for our long 20-mile runs, which you have to do when training for a marathon. And my husband and my son, who was also in college, would ride with us to bring us the water. There's no way you can carry enough water for 20 miles. So it truly helped our family. So my point here in transitioning back and helping with some of those kind of issues is fitness, wellness as a family, working together, and then also telling your story. Ed walked into my office the other day, scared the hell out of me. I have a hyperstartle reflex. It's pretty embarrassing. People wonder why I jump out of my seat just because they walk into my office. I don't know why it happens. I'm not afraid. I don't think Ed's coming to hit me up or hurt me, and try to get me through a 21-gun salute, and I'm about done for the day. So I am the face of those veterans you talk about. We're not all totally broken heroes here. So let's make sure we get that word out, and we have folks that are helping us do that. Mary, can you raise your hand? Mary Hagee runs a wonderful site, Vet Success, did I get the name right? Where she profiles successful veterans to try to change that national narrative of broken veterans. So I think that's one way to help this idea that veterans leave their jobs. It's partly, let's change the narrative so we can get them hired. But when I think about veterans and why they don't stay at jobs, and you're right, that's a wonderful study. I'd recommend that everybody read the CNAS study on veterans in transition. Much of the misplacement of veterans is due to what I call the civilian-military divide. It is alive and well. And unless we help both the civilian population as well as the veteran population narrow that divide, it ain't going to happen. And we've got organizations that are helping us do that. So the Travis Manion Foundation, in your self-discovery employment workshops, helping veterans think through what they want, what they're doing, who they are, work through any of their issues so that they can find a career, not a job. You stick with a career. You don't often stick with a job. But the other side of that are our employers. So think of our recruiters, our hiring managers, and our supervisors. So we source military talent. We're hiring 10,000, and we've got plenty of folks applying for jobs. But unless the recruiter understands that resume they're looking at when they screen it, they are not going to bring it to the slate for the hiring manager to look at. So we first have to get it from the recruiter and help the recruiters understand the military population. If you don't know the difference between a major and a private, you're very unlikely to interview them. If you don't understand that a communications officer in the military works with networks and building communication plans, is not the same as a public affairs officer. I've had so many folks take communications officers and put them in for what we all know as a public affairs job. So it's that type of knowledge that I think really limits us, we as employers, from putting our veteran, or what I call military talent, into the right position. You're not going to slate them, and you're not going to interview them if you're not comfortable. There is no malicious intent here, but we have to help our civilian teammates understand the military. So we've partnered with PsychArmor, which has a free online library to help educate the civilian population. And we're putting this on our learning management system so that our hiring managers, our recruiters, our people leaders, the basics of the rank structure, the basics of there are 5 military service and we're not all soldiers, the basics of what is a job category. And the big one is understanding the mandatory leadership training that everyone in the military must participate in. These people come to us vetted and trained. We've all heard this, less than 30% of the civilian population between 17 and 24 could even qualify for the military due to drug issues, law issues, character issues, and physical health. So you're getting a population that's fit, as long as they haven't been out too long and let it all go, that's fit, that's drug-free, and that has gone through that leadership training. So that's amazing. But unless we understand the military, we are not going to be able to relate to that population, and therefore we are not going to hire them for the right position, not an entry-level position, but the right position, understanding the incredible skills they bring to us, and therefore they're not going to stay. So my call to action for everybody here is go to the free PsychArmor courses. They're incredible. But I'm guessing everybody here is military, so I'm talking to myself, because we all know this stuff. So push it out to all those people who don't understand us, and then let's get these folks into the right position. I think that's so much of it. We're not doing anything wrong. You ask, what are we getting wrong? I don't think it's what are we getting wrong. It's that we must go to the next step, which is truly understanding on the civilian side what the military is all about. We have put the onus on the veteran for too long. Translate your skills into civilian skills. When you get to the interview, you still got to go back to your military speak and say what you did. So unless our interviewers understand that, it's not going to change a thing. So we're not getting it wrong. We just need to move forward.
I think that's a great way to put it, because again, talking about our transition program for us, it's about making sure that when veterans do walk into that job market, they understand where they see themselves, where their passions lie. But if the employer doesn't understand where they fit, then it's not going to work. So I think it's great that you look at it from that perspective. And I'll just quickly say and put another shout out for health, because after Travis died, the first thing I did was run a marathon. So I know how important that is, that whole mind and body and that holistic approach to well-being and helping you to transition. This question is for Matt McCarthy. Matt, our discussion today has focused on veterans thriving after military, and of course, flourishing in a professional capacity is important to this. In order for veterans to be successful at work, we need to create professional environments that permit them to thrive. As the founder of Vets Connect at Vanguard, an employee resource group, which you spoke a little bit about, what do corporations and businesses need to be doing to contribute to the overall success of veterans in the workforce?
Thank you, Ryan. When you started, you talked about 3 ingredients that were really important for veterans to thrive. You talked about the engagement and those positive relationships and that connection and finding a sense of meaning. And it strikes me that's actually the key ingredients for the employees in any company, really in any environment, to thrive. Without those ingredients, it's hard for someone who comes to work every day, whether or not they have a service background or not, to really feel that what they're doing is meaningful and they can be connected and to bring their whole selves to work. And so I think part of it is, in any company, how do you make sure that the veterans that are on your staff are assimilating, that they're benefiting from what already exists, and that the company's investing in avenues for those things to be there for all of their employees. Veterans are going to thrive in organizations that truly do value diversity and value inclusion, that are trying to create a sense of community, that allow veterans to bring their whole selves to work, and that there is a connection between the mission, the core purpose of that organization, and what that veteran's being asked to do each and every day. That wasn't something that, for any of us who served, had to get pointed out to us. I don't think many folks got up every morning and laced up their boots and said they were off to support and defend the Constitution. But there was a mission of the organization. It was clear, and it caused things to happen in those small and those larger units that can feel absent to veterans in a corporate setting. And then I think it's for the veterans initiatives, the kinds of things we're trying to do at Vanguard, is how can you augment that typical experience for all employees to make sure that beyond the on-the-job experience that the veterans having, that they're doing that. And so that's really why we started Vets Connect. I realized I myself was masking a little bit, wasn't bringing my whole self to work because I wasn't often using my military experience in the storytelling. I was referring to client engagements at Bain & Company, but not times when I was a company commander in the Army. And so we started this grassroots really to kind of work from that affiliation end of the spectrum. I've seen so many companies that are starting at the recruiting and hiring, they're moving right through the onboarding, and then they're worrying about retention because they find that they've done a good job of making sure there are veterans in their hiring funnel, but they're not staying. And so we've actually tried to come at it, I think, a little bit the other way. And how do we make sure that the veterans that are already there are thriving, and then engage them in making sure that those that we're hiring are onboarding well? And I think now that we've at least got a subtle base of that that's operating relatively well, we can afford to shift further left in that process and be able to engage organizations like Hire Heroes USA and find ways to get more veterans into our funnel. And so we've done some very basic things. You come down to what's at the foundation of somebody being successful in an environment. You need to have informal mentors. Those are the kind of, no one ever used that term for me when I was in the Army. Who's your informal mentor, right? But it was the S3 and the other battalion who was willing to listen to me and be a sounding board to me when I had challenges as a commander. And so you had an environment that created those for you. You've got to seek those out and nurture those relationships. You need a circle of trust, I call it, right? So the environment you're operating in the military causes you to spend time with folks in a way that engenders much deeper relationships than you're likely to get in a corporate environment where you show up to your building and you spend time in your cube or in meetings or at your terminal. So how do we make sure that veterans are connecting to folks so they can find those deeper trusting relationships? And then how do we encourage them to get out and network, right? The reality is in the military, it's often not a benefit to you to understand what's happening in some platoon on the other side of your base. But in a corporate environment, if you're not networking, you don't understand how the organization operates as much. So we've done some very basic things. We talked about community outreach being the way we started. Veterans Multi-Service Center here in Philadelphia. I'm beginning to start to work with Travis Manion Foundation. And how do we take the shared experiences that we can create? So we've done things that, I got to admit, on the initial blush seemed kind of silly to me. We've started doing formation runs on campus. On Veterans Day, it's bright and early in the morning, we'll meet in front of the headquarters. We form up. I bought a guide on, and we go for a very slow, very short shuffle around the campus. It took us a little while to get Vanguard appropriate cadences, but and we've done that. One member has gotten a standing invitation, so we meet in one of the main cafeterias, or galleys as we call them. Quick aside there, Vanguard is a nautically themed company. We're named after the HMS Vanguard, the lead ship in Admiral Nelson's fleet. So as an Army guy, all the ships on the walls, kind of difficult for me. But in our galley, we have a chow hall once a month where veterans just get together, meet up, and meet one another, and that's been helpful. We've had Army-Navy softball games, Army-Navy football games, and just things to give folks common connections. And then there's been some symbols that we've done. We've adopted Flag Day, and we have a Flag Day ceremony. And it was really important that this last Flag Day happened shortly after the terrible events down in Orlando. And so we invited folks from our Open, the CRG for LGBTQ at Vanguard, to join us in that ceremony as a way to, again, help stitch together that broader community outside of veterans. And then little things that end up being symbolic. We had a slideshow on our main internal website a few Veterans Days ago where we asked veterans to submit pictures of themselves when they were in service. And I heard from so many veterans how critical that was to them making connections to folks, because many people won't ask about your service unless you give them the opening. And if you don't encourage people to do that and give them a venue, they might not. And then I guess the last thing I'd say is, if you encourage the leadership to embrace it. So our CEO, Bill McNabb, recently spent what he called his summer vacation at the Department of Defense Joint Civilian Orientation Conference. He spent 5 days, at Fort Bragg and on an aircraft carrier, and he came back and he blogged about that to the entire 15,000 employee population. And he talked about the values that he saw there in those environments and connected them to our values at Vanguard. And I think those are the kind of things you have to encourage leaders to do, to be open and to do that. So I believe we're going to have a spillover effect and drive engagement across the organization, and then take the lessons that we're learning and get with folks like General Eggert's staff and folks from other companies and figure out how can we make sure we're sharing those best practices so that that learning doesn't have to get done one company at a time, but that we can make sure that all companies are thinking about how to do that well. Thank
you so much. I think, good points brought up, especially following General Eggert's comments, talking about that sense of retention. It's the veteran figuring out their passions, the employers figuring out where they fit, and then it's on the employer to create that sense of community, right? So I think when we build that, that's when we become very successful in making sure veterans are thriving in the workplace. My next question is for Lakin. Lakin, you've experienced significant trauma as a result of your military experience. As someone on this panel who is still in the midst of her transition from the military, and as someone who has demonstrated resilience throughout, what has been the most difficult part of the process, and what has gone really well?
Thank you, Ryan. As you know, I'm still pretty much transitioning. I just recently got out in June, and the transition is I'm literally still transitioning. It's so hard. I went from being able to be taken care of with my friends with medical every day to I sit at home and then I go to work. I mean, that's it. I don't have no camaraderie. I have really no one to talk to. I have nothing anymore. And when I got injured and I went to the Forgotten Battalion, Wounded Warrior Battalion is called the Forgotten Battalion. When you go there, you're forgotten about. And then it's really, really, really hard to go from the Forgotten Battalion to you don't see anybody else anymore. You go to medical appointments, you go get surgeries, you try to get better, you deal with your PTSD, you work out, you go to Invictus games, you go to Warrior games. That's all you do. And then once you get out, you don't see your brothers anymore. You don't see your sisters anymore. You see nothing. And the transitioning is really hard. Now I'm in a civilian job, and now I manage a restaurant, and I have 17-year-old kids coming to work and 23-year-old people coming to work, and they have no strive. They just want to come there and sit on Facebook. Literally, that's all they want to do. Or I tell them, hey, take the trash out, and they'll sit there on Facebook. Go take the trash out. Over and over and over again. And they have no strive, and it's hard because I want to look at them, and I want to kind of I want to knife hand them. And if you're a Marine, you know what a knife hand is. And I want to knife hand them, and I can't. I can't even yell at them. I can't do anything. And it's really hard. So I've had to take a step back and realize, well, the transitioning program the Marine Corps had, they didn't tell you, well, you're going to have to not be a drill instructor anymore. You're going to have to, step back and be a civilian. I go to work and I work. I'm on the go. I have like natural energy. I'm like a fly, like I'm just zoom back and forth. And then I have everyone else that just kind of mopey around. And they, I guess you can say like they half ASS it all the time. So, I mean, it's really hard. I came from values that you do everything the right way for the right reason at the right time. Like I came from those values, and now I have people who don't have any values. They have zero. All they want to do is get a paycheck and do the minimum work and go home. So it's very hard for me. I'm still, excuse me, I'm still transitioning. I mean, it's really hard. Even the medical field. I have not heard from the VA in 6 months. I have called them every day. When do I have an appointment? When do I have an appointment? I haven't had mental health in 6 months. I don't have any nerve block medication for my back. I mean, it's hard. From mostly the pain or walking or something like that, like it's really, really hard. But I mean, other than that, the transitioning it's going to be a long time. It's going to be very, very hard. I was not prepared for this kind of transition. I was told, do a resume. If you do it wrong, go try out for a job, do this, do that. And I did those things, but they didn't prepare me for certain things like they didn't they didn't prepare me to go to the VA and sit there for 8 hours and not get seen. They said that you're going to be seen in 3 months. They said that you're going to have a job. They said you need to do this thing at this time, and when you do those things, you're still nothing's happening. So the transition for me is so hard, and I'm still going through it. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Lakin, for that very candid response. And I think, she touches on a lot of the very critical aspects that veterans are going through. And, I think it's really important to understand that, while every veteran has challenges while they're transitioning, some of those are very much more so than others. So, we're going to work with you to make sure that you're in a good place and you get through this transition process in a positive way, and you're on your feet, and hopefully you can be given that knife hand again.
Yeah, thank you.
My next question is...
Take a look at the Comcast career site.
All right, I will.
We'll see what we can do to help you.
All right.
My next question is for Maura. Maura, to anyone who even takes a glance at your resume, it seems clear that you've had an enormously successful military and professional life. Northwestern to the Marine Corps to Harvard Business School to a Fortune 500 company. Yet it's really in devoting your life to public service that seems that's where you thrive. What was missing before you were able to find your latest professional commitment to the public?
First of all, thank you for the question. I think what I've heard just echoed here over the last few minutes is that transitioning is hard, and that was absolutely and entirely my experience as well. I think it's important to acknowledge that it is, inherent in transitioning is that it's going to be difficult. I mean, if you listen to what Zach was talking about being in the Second Battle of Fallujah, my battalion got there right after the end of it, which was, I believe, December 24th, 2004. Most people will not experience something like that again in their life. The bond that Travis and Brendan, I believe, had, you don't necessarily find that day one of corporate America. And so the idea that you're going to replicate something like going through that experience, I think we got to just acknowledge from the outset is that you're not going to. And so knowing that, how then do you compensate for it, adjust for it as much as possible? Because you're never going to completely kind of get there. I went from, I'll just share a little bit about my experience, kind of what I've learned from it, and then what I think, the solution can be to help, as I said, kind of help sort of fill in that gap. I kind of knew I was going to go into service at some point. I was raised in a Catholic family, and my grandmothers were in Jesuit education, but I never really considered the military. And my guidance counselor suggested I apply to ROTC, and I laughed at her, and I told her she was crazy, because a lot of women weren't really doing that at the time. And G.I. Jane had just come out, and I kind of liked my hair. and she said, "You're not." I said, "I'm not all what they're looking for." And she said, "Actually, you're exactly what they're looking for." It turns out she was right, and I was wrong. But I almost didn't do it because I didn't know anyone in the military that kind of looked like me. There was no one I could see that I could relate to. And it wasn't until actually the summer between my freshman and sophomore year of college when we went to Kortromit, which is what they send the ROTC kids to. For those of you who went to the academy might not know that, but you do a week of every major community in my case, which is the Navy. So you do a week of submarines, a week of aviation, a week of surface warfare, and a week of Marine Corps, and you get to kind of play Marine for a week. And I was probably about an hour into Marine Week when I said, well, this is clearly what I'm supposed to do. And it was the people, it was the camaraderie, it was the commitment to something bigger than yourself, it was the mission, it was the fact that you got up at 4:30 in the morning and you weren't, you weren't in bed till 23:30, but you felt like you'd done something with your day. And that was far and away the best decision I ever made. Far and away the best decision I ever made was becoming a U.S. Marine. But still thought, I'd kind of serve for a little bit, and I was excited about it. I was excited about the people. It wasn't until being in Iraq in 2005 when I found kind of my passion for serving, which was the young, mostly 18 and 19-year-old, really mostly enlisted kids that I had the unbelievable privilege of serving with, most of whom didn't grow up in the place that I grew up. And I wanted to take care of them, and I wanted to make sure that their families had what they needed And I wanted to make sure that when we sent them in harm's way, it was only kind of as a last resort, and that we'd really thought it through. And due to the civilian control of the military, I thought the best way for me to take care of Marines, sailors, soldiers, and airmen was actually to leave active duty and go into policy. That's what led me to the Kennedy School and the business school. I knew I was going to go back into public service at some point, but I thought it was really important to get private sector experience. And I went to, after 3 years in graduate school, went to PepsiCo, which was a tremendous opportunity and to run a business directly out of business school. What I didn't recognize, and going through the transition I'm starting now, and hopefully going to learn from the lessons from before, I didn't, I think, realize how much I would miss the community and the sense of purpose and mission. And if I could go and do it over again, I would have done things like reach out to groups like the Travis Manion Foundation, Team Red, White, and Blue, Team Rubicon, The Mission Continues. Because it's so, so critical, and Matthew talked about this, to have a community within the organizations, within corporations. But it's also critical to have a veterans community kind of outside of that. And I think Matthew mentioned a lot of really, really great ways that corporations can create a community for veterans within that, and that's critical that they do. But you said kind of a rosy transition. I had a very, very difficult time transitioning from business school to corporate America. And I actually went to New York with my company for about 11 months and moved back to Massachusetts because I missed my community. And I didn't know about all of the resources that were out there, all of the great communities that were out there. And it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about being involved with these organizations, is because I know it would have made a fundamental difference in my life. And I was pretty well resourced. I mean, candidly, I had 2 degrees from an Ivy League school, and I had a lot of friends looking out for me, and I had a lot of mentors, and I had a really, really difficult time. And if it was that hard for me, how the heck is the Lance Corporal doing? So now I'm facing another transition, and I think one of the things we tried to do in government, and I'll talk a little bit about, I think, what government needs to do, what the nonprofit or sector needs to do. We have to do a much better job, and I had the chance to work on this a little bit at the VA and a little bit at the Pentagon, and we've made some strides, but we have a long way to go. We've got to do a better job in the Department of Defense of educating people about what this transition is. And the way to get it done is within the individual services, and great organizations like SAICOMR and Travis Manion Foundation are signing memorandums of understanding with the individual services, because we need to know, service members need to know about the Travis Manion Foundation before they get out. They need to know that there's a Team Red, White, and Blue chapter in Manchester, New Hampshire before they move to Manchester, New Hampshire. And we do not do nearly a good enough job of educating them on that. And that is critical, because the VA does not own that transition alone. And a lot of that work needs to happen not at the VA, but within the Department of Defense. We also need to educate people in the Department of Defense, and Marjorie Morrison here and her organization, SAICOMR, is doing a phenomenal job of this and starting to make inroads with the services. But we need to educate people while they're still in the Department of Defense on what is going to happen, and resilience training before they go to combat. Not after, before they go. And we need to make mental health a much bigger part, a much bigger component of the health system within the Department of Defense. Don't believe me. You don't believe me. Admiral Mike Mullen talks about this. You can Google it. It's called Total Force Fitness, and it's his mantra that mental health needs to have parity with physical health, and that gives the readiness of the force. There's stigma about going to see a mental health practitioner when you're within the Department of Defense. 50% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans don't seek treatment because of the stigma. That is, wildly, wildly out of proportion and wrong. So a lot of that work is on the government to fix, but the nonprofit sector can help them to do that. What's on the individual, corporate America, I won't really kind of go into, because Matthew said it, literally, you took the words right out of my mouth in terms of corporate America doing little things like the Army-Navy game, leadership breakfasts, creating the employee resource groups that create a community there, and our corporations need to lean into that, and they need to lean into it very, very hard. The individual veteran, I think the transition, the onus is on them to reach out to fellow veterans, to know that if you're having a difficult time transitioning, your buddies probably are too. It's the little things like sending a text message, right? Just picking up the phone, particularly like at times like this during the holidays. So anyway, I hope that's helpful just to hear kind of a little bit about, kind of my experience. I hope it helps other people, because it's inherently a very, very difficult challenge that everybody kind of owns a part of. Last thing I'll say, and it's been said, echoed here a number of times, but cannot emphasize, at least for me personally and from what I've seen sort of anecdotally, and research shows it as well, is the importance of fitness. I mean, we know that the brain releases chemicals like dopamine when the body does exercise, and it's actually important for both physical and mental health. I literally treat it like a conference call. I put it on my calendar and make it a priority every day. But that's because it's important for my physical health, but also my mental health. It's when I feel the most alive, like myself, and feel like a Marine.
That was great. Thank you.
Ryan, can
Yeah.
I just add something to
Sure.
this? It's important for us to recognize that we have about 200,000 individuals who transition every year. And I think the majority of them are actually not ready or capable of transitioning into corporate America. I think most of them transition back into our community colleges, into small businesses in our community. And I think the things that Travis Manion and other organizations like yours do is to help promote within communities the knowledge and the recognition of the needs of that population, to create opportunities where someone coming back isn't there in isolation. And again, I think those kinds of partnerships to promote that. I would also, and again, this is sort of the lens that I have through my clinical work, would remind us that of that 200,000, roughly 10% come out with what we call bad papers. These are individuals who have discharges that may make it all the more difficult for them in our communities. And so the things that we can do to try, again, to recognize and support that population, I think is critical.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, again, Mara touched on the idea of the public or private partnerships. And I think that's incredibly crucial. And it's something that, I've seen the conversations are taking place. We just now need to start making them happen. But the idea of partnerships within your communities, that's really important goal for us at TMF, is making sure that the communities where we do have a physical presence, and right now that's 5 locations, soon to be 8 in the next several months here.
Well, you have a much larger presence, though, because
we do.
Your people are in communities.
Sure, but we want to make sure that ones we have an actual physical presence with staff on the ground, that those veterans in those communities know TMF is here.
Yep.
Right.
So there's no question of what's in my community. They already know. We want to make sure that we are out there putting out a campaign of awareness to know, okay, you're in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, you've got TMF here for anything you need. So I'm going to give the last question over to Zach. Zach, your professional experience presents a very interesting counterpoint to the discussion so far. Through Headstrong, you see military veterans whose needs are so immediate and urgent that thriving seems like an unachievable dream. Much of today's discussion is aimed at veterans. We're talking about veterans in corporate positions, veterans who are looking for a sense of purpose again. So these are veterans we talk about, that are at a 5, right, on that scale, and we're trying to get them to an 8 or 9. But a lot of times you're dealing with veterans that are at a 2 or 3. And what advice can you give to veterans that are at that point? And I believe that there's some of the same things that we're talking about, but there's a different way to approach that veteran that's at a 2 or 3.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is get help. I mean, it sounds simple, but, and I think more importantly, if you know that veteran, encourage them to get help. At Headstrong, we treat all different types of veterans. I mean, we have veterans that are a 9 or a 10. We have a veteran who is a former SEAL at Goldman Sachs who, is at 9 or 10. We have guys that have not left their home, can't leave their home because of the anxiety that they have, and after months of treatment, they're volunteering at the SPCA. So we work with veterans across the spectrum. I think one of the biggest issues with mental health, I think this is true of the job market as well, is that there's a lack of knowledge and familiarity on the part of veterans. So in the job market, the problem is that, most of us grow up dreaming about joining the military. I mean, my son is 2.5 years old, and if you ask him what a Marine says, he says, "Oorah." Interestingly enough, if you ask him what somebody in the Army says, he says they cry like a baby and say, "Wah, wah." I have no idea where he learned that from. No idea. I think he was just born that way, But
Maybe
I think
your doctors can help him with that.
I should enroll him in Headstrong. I think that there's, if you asked a veteran who's transitioning out, what does Comcast do? They might be able to say what service they provide, but they don't really know what it takes to run the day-to-day business operations. They don't know what the roles are there. They have a complete lack of familiarity with the civilian job market. You go to a job fair for veterans, you'll see there's a crowd around the for-profit schools, and there's a crowd around the law enforcement tables, because that's what people know, right? They've seen the marketing for University of Phoenix. They've seen, they know what law enforcement is. They think that's directly translatable. They're familiar with that. I think similarly with mental health, post-traumatic stress is such an alien term. I mean, what does it mean to feel post-traumatic stress? Whereas if you ask somebody what it means to feel anxiety or anger, or they're depressed, or they're having marriage issues, right? I think you really sort of need to take it from this sort of alien, unfamiliar term to what are you feeling on a day-to-day basis? A lot of guys will get out, or girls will get out, and they'll think that I'm just an angry, depressed person now. They don't even relate that to post-traumatic stress. We had a guy who went through our treatment program who had a massive panic attack before going to his sister's 40th birthday party. Sat down at the bar, had a beer, had a second beer, and realized the anxiety went away. And his wife said to him, "Yeah, that's called self-medicating." And fortunately for him, a light bulb went off, and he realized that is self-medicating. A lot of folks don't make that connection. And so I think there's a real education deficit and knowledge deficit that needs to be addressed. And then the other side of it, and I think this is a credit to the population when you talk about this need to serve, it takes usually, so we recently expanded. We started the program in New York. We now treat veterans in Chicago, San Diego, Houston, and we just got funding to treat veterans in D.C., and so we'll be up and running in D.C. in a couple of months. And we're undergoing a national expansion. We hope to be in 20 cities by 2020. And it usually takes, for most of the veterans we treat, about 5 to 6 months for them to become asymptomatic, for the headaches to go away, for them to be able to sleep through the night, for them to no longer have anxiety attacks or anger issues, for them to have a better relationship with their spouse. And almost immediately what happens when they're better is they want to start helping other veterans. They come into the program and they say, "All right, here's the deal. I don't want anybody to know I'm getting help. All right, I'll come in. My wife is nagging me. I got to come in. My mom, whoever it is, they come in. He or she will tell us, we don't want anybody to know about this. At the end of 6 months, they won't shut up about it. They want everybody to know that they're getting help because they know by telling their story, they're saving other people's lives. And they know that treatment works if you get the right treatment. And so we have core philosophy at Headstrong that if you have the courage to get help, maybe it should be if you have the knowledge and courage to get help, and you get the right help. And it's our job at Headstrong to make sure you're getting the right help. We only work with world-class clinicians with 10-plus years of experience. All the care is managed in every city we're in by our team at Cornell to ensure it's effective. It's tailored to the individual. But if you have the courage to get help and you get the right help, you can recover. You can get your life back on track. You can get back to the best version of yourself. And when that happens, our number one source of referrals becomes people in the program referring other people into the program. And so, I think Maura just hit the nail on the head. Like a lot of this is it's about education. It's about storytelling. I think you can sit somebody through a transition class where you tell them, hey, the VA is going to see you in 3 months. You need to have your resume look like this, and you run them through the numbers. But you also need to tell them stories. You need to introduce them to somebody who has been through treatment and gotten better. You need to introduce them to, a service technician at Comcast that was a corporal in the Marine Corps in the infantry, and now they say, oh, that's what that person does now. That's what their life is like now. I can do that too. And the more that you tell those stories, we're storytellers by nature, and I think that's a big part of the solution.
I think that's an incredible point to break on. I was just sharing with Maura and Zach before we came up on stage the idea of our character program. And if you were at our event last night, we featured Keith Palmer, a veteran that works at Johnson & Johnson, and he's gone on to work with Travis Manion Foundation and really play a tremendous role in teaching character development to at-risk youth in Philadelphia. And when we started our Character Does Matter program, it was about the youth. It was about us being able to go out there and create positive change in tomorrow's youth, to use the examples of our men and women who serve in uniform to inspire them to be servant leaders in their own backyards. But what happened is, as veterans were going out there and sharing their stories, at talking about themselves, General Eggert said it, we don't really talk about our transition. We don't really talk about what we did. Well, there's an incredibly powerful and therapeutic notion to the idea of telling your story, talking about what you stood for, what service means to you, what leadership means to you. And we were able to find that those benefits to the kids, they're obvious, right? I mean, we have men and women out there every day who have put on the uniform of our nation and are going out and teaching character to our kids. So that's obvious. But never imagine the incredible and powerful benefits to the veteran who's able to go out there and find a sense of purpose and passion again through sharing their stories with the youth. So, and I think that rings true, with everything that you all spoke about. I want to open it up and see if anybody has any questions for any of our panelists.
I'm so moved by your discussion. Sure. I'm so moved by your discussion of behavioral health and mental health services, because as a practitioner for years, it's an area in healthcare that severely lacks, and that we don't have enough providers. And if we do have providers, most insurances don't cover it. And we are looking at programs that are available through Cornell, that probably has a great resource of practitioners in psychology and psychiatry. But I'm really more concerned for you, Lakin, that where do you find that resource? At Cooper, we have a Veterans VIP program that started a few years ago with the onset of hearing about the VA and the delay of appointments. And one thing we're struggling to do is to staff our behavioral health center that's open on a college campus, not only to the community, but primarily targeted at veterans. But I need to know, are we doing the right thing? Is that what we should be doing? And if you come to us, in our VIP program, we've provided a lot of charity care for veterans who came from the VA who didn't have the right insurance, and we provided that care. But what is it that you need in behavioral health services from the healthcare providers to help you transition in the community? Because we've served a lot of veterans this year in community outreach as well as screenings, and they're all different ages, and they all have different stories. I mean, I have a patient who was a World War II vet who started to cry and tell me his story. I mean, so what is it that you see that we should have in behavioral health services to target it to the veterans?
Personally, I think that when you get out, like I was diagnosed with complex PTSD. I've had multiple traumas throughout my life. So it took me about a year to actually open up to my therapist. And then once I got out, and I was with her for about 2 years. So for 1 full year, we actually were able to work on my mental health. And then when I got out, they said, guess what? You're going to have to get a new one. So, and I still don't have one. So right now I'm still waiting on the fact that the VA is trying to get me one. I think that the best thing is to maybe keep, or before they get out, have them start working with somebody else before they get out so they can keep that behavioral therapist, so they can keep that therapist with them, because it's really hard for people to actually gain that trust when they have that stigma in the Marine Corps that if you go to medical, I mean, you're broken. If you go to medical, you're weak. And so there's that big stigma. So, I mean, if we can break that and you can have the veterans or the active duty members start going to the therapist beforehand, before they get out, to where they can go ahead and get that rapport with them and that relationship, I think that would be a great thing. Okay. No. Yes, ma'am.
You know,
You're welcome.
if I can just add one thing, one of the things I heard a lot about visiting VA hospitals and vet centers throughout the country, and this is, Ryan, why I'm so encouraged that you guys are expanding to, going into North Carolina, expanding different locations nationally, is that the local veterans community, be it the VA, be it the Travis Manion Foundation, be it behavioral health providers, know of each other and have those local relationships with each other. We do a great job. Marjorie and I were talking about this last night. We do a great job in Washington and at the headquarters level of all knowing one another. I'm not so sure that, that the lead for like the vet center in Atlanta, Georgia knows the, whoever the closest Travis Manion Foundation person is there, knows the 5 behavioral health providers in the area. We've got to do a better job of that. So there becomes this sort of infrastructure connectivity on the ground such that when the veteran arrives, he or she, gosh, they come and see you. Hey, have you gone, running with Team Red, White, and Blue yet? Right? Do you know about, there's a Veterans Town Hall that the local vet center is hosting on Friday at 6. I'm going to go. Do you want to come with me? And so it becomes an interconnected kind of web community that we've got to do a better job. And we've got pockets of excellence some places in the country. And we've got to do a better job of making that consistent throughout the United States.
Thanks. We have a question, I think, a question in the back, and then we'll come right in.
Hi, my name is Tony Bushnell. I'm from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Hi, I was invited by Hugo. Thank you. I am new to the area. The Department of Veterans Affairs, we're doing exactly what you're saying. We now have relationship managers and field consultants who are actually in the field so that we can see what's going on. So I'm new to back to the area. I'm from the Delaware area. And so I'm the relationship manager for all of Delaware, all of Pennsylvania, and southern New Jersey. I have field consultants in Pittsburgh and Delaware, but I came from being in charge of North Carolina and Virginia. So exactly, we are creating over 100 community boards so that we can bring nonprofit, state, federal organizations together to understand the overlaps and the gaps, and so that we can be in a position that we can provide information to veterans when they get out, when they transition. And we also understand that during the transition out of DOD, there needs to be some additional information. And so we are looking to work with DOD to ensure we can get additional information to the veterans. So thank you. I have cards. I'm interested in learning more about all of your organizations now that I'm here, and I will be attending the DVVC meetings. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A question right here from this young woman.
Free to chime in if you'd like, but as you transitioned out,
Use the mic, it would help.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, you want me to use that?
Yeah, please.
Lakin, I heard your story. I heard your challenges. It's very similar to a lot of the challenges that I've encountered at the vet center. I also worked at Wounded Warrior Project, but as the women who are a little bit further along in their transition, how do I reach women service members to get them on that path of healing, and what helps you in your recovery other than building that sense of community? So as I'm building a sense of community at the center, what would you ideally, as a woman, like to see that look like?
Well, you're exactly right. When you talk about folks who won't self-identify, women veterans are the highest class.
I need you to self-identify.
Exactly. So your first issue isn't so much of what should I offer, it's how do we find them? And you won't see, there's a few and they're growing, but we really do need to create the Delaware Valley Women's Veteran Coalition. We could be a chapter of the Delaware Valley Coalition and encourage women to come because they are not comfortable. All studies will tell you women veterans do not self-identify, nor do they affiliate and feel an affinity to many of the groups. Now, the newer groups, when you think of Team Red, White, and Blue, you will find women veterans. Mm-hmm. So we just gotta encourage and make it easy.
I think one, and I should clarify. Thank you very much for introducing yourself. I did not mean to imply that we weren't doing that. We are very much doing that with the My VA initiative at the Department of Veterans Affairs. What I should better articulated was that there are places where we're doing it really, really well. There are other places that we've got a lot of work to do, and that is really the solution. Exactly what you're doing, you being here today and meeting the other leaders in the area, that's how this works. That's how we win at this. So thank you very much for letting us know and sharing your story. One on the women's veterans piece, I think it's very, very challenging. One thing I'd added, a best practice I saw at the Washington, D.C. VA Medical Center. They were having a problem with outreach. They have one of the nicest women's veterans clinics in the country. Next time you're in Washington, go down to the VA and take a tour of it. It literally feels like a spa. And they did a ladies' night. And I'll tell you, I was at the VA at the time, at VA Central Office, and I learned about it on the radio, driving into work, because they were talking about ladies' night on the radio. And they had all of these organizations of people who want to help veterans, right? Like they had local clinicians, but they also had a local beauty parlor. They had a couple local businesses come in, and they basically threw this party, and it was a really, really nice party at the VA. I mean, they had a piano player, they had cocktails, and it was a ton of fun. And all these ladies were lined up out the door because they heard about it actually on the radio and on social media. So that's just, again, one example of of what works. But you could organize that and work with local businesses who will then, through their social media channels, their local networks, push out that information. And it was a great way to bring people into the VA.
Yeah, I think that men, for some reason, transition out of the military, they're very quick to find these groups and quickly form these tight bonds, and they find the other Marine in the room, and it's hard for women in that respect. We're going to take one more question.
Ryan, I'd also like to respond to that. Go ahead.
I'm Fern Dillett, and I work at the VA Medical Center here in Philadelphia, and we are actually in the process of putting finishing touches on our brand new redesigned, enlarged Women Veterans Health Center. And we are going to have a program similar to what you described in the spring, and we definitely want to get you on board and anybody else, and through the Comcast and Vanguard and anyone else. Date has to be announced yet, but we are going to do very, very similar to what you described.
Wonderful.
Ryan, let me share two experiences very quickly that I think are important to that question. I had the honor of being involved in integrating women into the military academy at West Point, and then subsequently had the honor of helping to integrate women aboard Navy ships for the then CNO of the Navy. And clearly success in both of those cases has happened. But what it took was creating a cadre of women mentors who were really very public and active in their mentoring activities. And it didn't just happen overnight, but it had to be done in a very thoughtful, programmatic, and it's sort of the effort of saying to you, step up and let them know you're a woman veteran, and help organize those groups coming out. But that mentorship by other senior women was just vital in making both of those things happen.
Yeah, again, that idea of storytelling. And we're going to take one last question.
Can I add one thing to that, is that we will not do this alone as women veterans. We need our battle buddies to do it together. We will get there when men care about women veterans as much as women care about women veterans. We have to do this together. Women talking to themselves ain't going to work. So invite every man you know to your women veteran events. They all have sisters, they all have mothers, they all served with women, and they're very much advocates. But I think we sometimes think they're not, and they're not going to be able to relate, but that isn't the case. Many of them are dual military couples.
Yep.
So they have that insight.
Wonderful, wonderful point. A question from you in the back, sir?
My name is Jeff Mock. I'm actually with Senator Bob Casey's office. And I was listening to, I believe, Lincoln, her story. And we have so many people that call our office, a lot of veterans, and that are having a hard time, getting in touch with the VA or having issues with the VA, looking at their cases, certain medicines, things like that. And we have a constituent services office that helps veterans, and they're directly working with the Veterans Affairs office. So my question is, how, do they do a good job preparing the people leaving their service for with resources that they can reach out to in case those things like, saying, I guess by that thumbs down, I'm guessing not, but no, but do they do a good job? And if not, what are some things that they can do in order to help people leaving service know their resources that they can have, and instead of just saying, oh, go to the VA or do this, you know what I mean?
Yes. So right before you get out, you go to a TRS class, a Transition Readiness Seminar. And it's usually 1 week long. But all they do is the first day or two, because I guess I'm the most recent one that just got out, the first day or two, they focus on VA. They tell you how to file a VA claim. They tell you what's going to happen for medical. They give you like where you're going to be, who's going to be around, how you're going to do it. And that's the first like 1 or 2 days. The last 3 days is usually, it's an all-day class. And the last 3 days, all they do is they'll say, well, this is how you're going to do a resume. So they'll teach you how to put a resume together. This is how you're going to do this, is how you're going to do that. But what they don't teach you is, I had no idea about Travis Manion Foundation until June. I did the Triumph Games. I had no idea about our vet success. I had no idea about what Headstrong is until now. I don't know these things because they don't tell us. They probably don't even know. They probably don't have the knowledge or the education behind it. So I think if we get with TRS members, these people who are giving the classes to the veterans, and give them the cards, give them the knowledge, then I think that would be great to pass on to the veterans. Because let's see, if I would have known about Headstrong this past summer, I probably wouldn't have lost 27 brothers to suicide. So, if I would have known about them, I would have said, hey, contact these people. I guarantee they would have taken them. So, my personal opinion, they need the knowledge in that TRS class. Maybe pass it on to the VA, pass it on to the TRS, because every Marine, before they get out, I'm not sure about the other services, but I know for a fact every Marine, enlisted and officer, has to take that class. You're not exempt from it. So if you can pass it on in that class, that would be great.
Can I just add one thing to that? I think one of the biggest dangers in transition is there's a lot of good idea fairies out there, right? You got everybody is trying to design the perfect system, and we have the perfect system for creating Marine soldiers, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, sailors, right? You take anybody in this country, you put them through boot camp, you put them through their training, they go through that process. You have, you know what you need to make an infantryman. You put all the materials together, you put the training together, you have the infantryman comes in on the side. The problem is when you're leaving, you're an individual going back to different communities, going back to rural America, going back to a city. And there's no one-size-fits-all approach to any of this, especially, and I think so much of this has to be community-based. I think we put too much on the VA. If 2 or 3 days of a 5-day transition class is focused on the VA, I think a bigger problem is I don't know how to solve this for rural America. I think a lot of cities are doing this right. I think, the city of Houston has their combined arms center where they're trying to get every single veteran coming back to the city of Houston to go through that combined arms center where all these, Travis Manion is there, we're there, Lone Star Foundation is there, Mission Continues is there, Team Rubicon is there, RWB is there, so that there's a process for Houston and there's a job network for Houston.
I think where the danger is if you try and design a system that you can put people through and you've got some product on the other end. That's I think dangerous. And instead, it's how do you give people the education, the knowledge, the resources they need, and connect them to their community. And what do we do to welcome them with open arms and to plug them into, housing, job, healthcare, education, whatever their needs are.
Thanks so much. And Marjorie, I'm going to close with you.
All of these are such great points, but I think what we have to, one of the biggest issues that we see all the time is when people are struggling, either because they're having a difficult time with mental illness or even just a temporary period of being in distress or having addiction issues, they isolate and they alienate, and they're hard to find. And to couple that, to make it even that much worse, is that those that are closest to them, when they try to encourage them to go get help, they become argumentative, and it's the number one thing I get all the time is, how I know this person's struggling, how can I help them? And I think all these are great ideas, but we almost have to go step backwards. And I'd like to leave all of you here with basically a plea is most people don't need advice when they're having a hard time. They just need someone to listen. They just need someone to listen. And Maura and I heard the Surgeon General earlier this week in Chicago, and he added another piece to it too. He said, compassion. If you can just give people compassion and say, I know you're having a hard time and I'm here for you. We don't have to solve all the problems. We'll figure out where to plug them in, but it's getting them to want to ask for help. And I'll tell you, I'll share really personally, Admiral Mullen came to me last night and asked, when I talked to him, about a mutual friend. And he said, we're really worried about him because he's not talking to anyone. And I, who am preached the stuff all day long, thought this person was mad at me because he wasn't responding to me. And so, this morning I called and didn't get a voicemail, but I texted 4 times, aggressively, we need to talk today. So I think that it's so easy to let people push us away, and we can't allow people to do that. And for all of you that know veterans and again, I'm sorry if I'm being preachy, but we can make a difference, and Zach said it so perfectly. It's the veterans who want to help the other veterans. You just have to make sure they don't give them the advice and just say, hey, I'm here, we're here for you. You need something. So I just wanted to
No, thank you, Marjorie. Piece. And I think that's a great place to end. The idea of veterans helping veterans, Admiral Mullen talked about it last night, this circle, or I think it was the Commandant actually, this circle, this continuous circle of connectivity and how we're all working together. And I said it last year at this same panel discussion, but the work kind of starts here. General Eiger said it. I'm preaching to the choir here, right? So the important thing for us to do is to go outside the walls of this room and make sure that we're talking to other people, both veterans and communities, about what needs to take place in order for us to help veterans to transition. I think this was an incredibly powerful panel, and I looked at the dichotomy between Lakin and Maura, 2 individuals who come from very different place in their military service, but both talked about their struggle to transition. And I think that's a really important aspect to touch on. So for all of us in this room, let's walk out of here today and make sure that we are talking about these ideas of public and private partnerships, of making sure communities know that they're getting the information out to veterans for the resources that are available, and finally to make sure that veterans are going out there and sharing their stories. Sharing their stories to each other and sharing their stories to bridge that civilian-military divide. I thank you guys all for being here today, and I can't thank all of you enough for spending your morning here with us and talking to us more about this idea of thriving. Thank you.
Thank you.